Story 1 by Derek J. I drove home alone from my friend's house, which was about an hour away in a very isolated residence. It was approximately 1 or 2 in the morning. I was so exhausted, I can't recall exactly, that I nearly wanted to stay at his house and sleep. Nevertheless, I would have had to cancel work, which wasn't exactly an option because the majority of the drive was through expansive farmlands where he lived. I listened to some music to keep myself awake and just stared at the empty road ahead for about 20 minutes. However, my headlights illuminated something in the middle of the road, so I slowed down and applied the brakes a little harder than I had to. It was a suitcase that looked like a foal. I was so exhausted and taken aback by the unopened suitcase that I probably stared at it for a long time before deciding to simply move it into the oncoming lane and avoid it. I wasn't in the mood to get out and move it or anything, but it was strange that it was standing upright like that, so it must have just fallen out of. Someone's truck happened to land like that, and I couldn't think of anything else to do. I continued driving, thinking about it for a little while, but eventually I forgot about it pretty quickly. Maybe 5 minutes went by, and the roads were still quiet. I was just cruising when a truck appeared in my headlights once more. No lights or blinkers were on, and the truck was parked in the middle of the lane. If I hadn't had my high beams on, it might have been dangerously close. I stopped behind them, waited for a moment, and then honked a few times. But the truck didn't move at all, and after 30 seconds, I couldn't even see any movement inside it through the back window. Began to slowly circle it, and as I did, I saw that it had some big dents and scrapes on the side. I couldn't tell if these were from a recent collision or not. It might have been one of those old trucks that never washed any of its parts. What's more worrisome is that I didn't see anyone inside the truck, and it was still dark. Through the windows, I was unable to make out any contour or shape of anyone seated in the front or rear. I pulled closer and in front of it, returning to my side of the road, then slowed down even more to study the area. It was still farmland in every direction, so why would someone park there and abandon their car? I felt weird about it, honestly a little uneasy. I drove on. Simply had a bad feeling about it and didn't want to stay too long to finish it. After that, I was definitely more awake. Were the truck and the suitcase connected in some way, or were they just located conveniently in the middle of the road? I never saw anyone on the side of the road returning to retrieve the suitcase, so I'm not sure, but I only managed to stop for a minute more before I had to. He was in my lane for the 3rd time, waving his arms at me to stop. He appeared to be in his early 40s with messy hair, cuts and scrapes on his hands and arms. He was generally in poor condition. When my tires stopped moving, he grinned and approached my window, asking if I had seen a truck not too far back that way. I replied that I did. The man hesitated for a moment before he finally said that he ran out of gas and was attempting to walk to a gas station, but why would I drive? I asked why it was parked in the road like that, and what he was doing out here, which I felt were reasonable questions to ask given the circumstances. He kept talking as if he wasn't letting me think about it, but now I was stumbling over my words, trying to think of an excuse to say no. However, as my eyes wandered behind him, I noticed something protruding from the crops on the side of the road, which appeared to be the tail end of a small car. Wouldn't he have asked me to drive him to the gas station? Deep in the crops, I could only make out one of the rear headlights vaguely reflecting the light from my car. I had no idea what was going on, but I knew it wasn't good. I rolled up the window, and the man's eyes widened, his smile turned to a frown, and he began yelling and banging. After I parked, I received money. Immediately after, I called the police, who said that although the truck had disappeared by the time they arrived, the car I had seen in the crops was still there. I suppose the scene was much worse than I had anticipated. It was someone else's vehicle, and the driver was dead, not from a collision, though it appeared they had probably picked up the man I had seen as a hitchhiker. Sadly, that was the last time I saw him. It's thought that the luggage and the truck in the road may have contributed to the automobile stopping and picking them up, but this isn't confirmed. Clearly, the hitchhiker I observed was lying about his truck running out of petrol. All of this was probably just a violent act committed by a deranged person for no apparent cause, which makes it even scarier. Story 2 by Kyle B. This was during the holidays and the roads weren't too bad. However, winter driving is always a little bit more exhausting, so it was just like any other day on earth. I left town around 6 o'clock p.m. to transport a load about 11 o'clock p.m. 2 states away. In order to use the restroom, have a coffee, and possibly take a little break from driving, I made my first stop at a small truck stop on the side of the road. I parked, went inside, and then emerged with mine. After getting coffee and getting back in the driver's seat, I took some time to myself and just sat there, drinking some and looking around. I noticed that there were only a few other trucks in the parking lot, so I assumed it was a quiet night. As I sat there, I noticed a man at the back of the building. The lights were dim there, but he was leaning against the wall and staring. Toward me, the only other vehicle parked here was my truck, so I was unable to see his eyes. I stayed to myself and continued drinking my coffee, but every time I turned around, the man was still staring over here. I knew it was nothing, but it still seemed strange enough for me to go. I put my drink in the cup holder, started the truck, and then pulled out and started the next part of the drive. The coffee definitely helped keep my eyes open, and about 30 minutes later, the roads were deserted. Snow was also beginning to fall. An LED light glinted in my side mirror for a brief moment. A gleam reflected off of something behind my trailer made me keep checking my mirrors, thinking a car was approaching, but I couldn't see anything behind me. Perhaps it was a damaged reflector on the road, or perhaps it was something else entirely, as the snow was starting to pile up a little bit. The road, but for the next hour or so, I concentrated more on the way ahead, making sure I survived. It started to get exhausting every minute, but then I noticed a brief flash in my sight mirror, and I barely moved my eyes fast enough to see what it was. There was a car directly behind my trailer, so close that my mirrors covered it completely. Its headlights were off, so my headlights only glinted on theirs when it was slightly off to the side. I was used to people tailgating me for moving slowly, but this was really odd in this case. After a few minutes of consideration, I decided that it would be better to avoid them or, at the very least, keep them off my tail for our safety because of the weather and the fact that they were so close to me without headlights. I switched lanes, but the automobile trailed in confusion, so I switched back into them. This time, they stayed in the right lane, which I believe was a sign that I was captured. They began to slow down and ultimately disappeared from view. I had no idea what they were doing, but at least they were off my back. I spent 2 more hours driving through the snow on the Colne Road. It was about 3 in the morning. There was only a parking area, no buildings or facilities, so I chose to pull off at a rest stop to catch a few hours of quiet. It was just one of those small detours off the road that might accommodate maybe 2 or 3 semis. I parked, turned off the engine and leaned. I reclined my chair all the way back and closed my eyes, falling asleep fairly quickly. I was accustomed to having little sleep, so every minute counts. The quiet winds and snow trickling down were very helpful, though I intended to wake up in 3 or so hours, but I woke up before then. I slowly opened my eyes to see the dark truck cabin in them. I see dim highway lights ahead of me. I was still extremely exhausted and had no idea why I'd woken up. I rolled over to adjust my posture, but as soon as I did, I saw that something outside my window was staring at me with eerie wide eyes. I nearly fell out of my chair, but the man didn't even flinch. He simply stepped down and attempted to open the door, but after several attempts I heard his footsteps remaining slow. I called for assistance on the radio, and a moment later a car, the same one that had been on the road before, came out from behind my truck. I provided as detailed a description as I could, and it was as the officers requested. I didn't know why he was stalking me or what he was attempting to accomplish, but I wanted to review everything that happened that night and remember the man I saw watching at the truck stop. Perhaps it was him all along. Story 3 by E.E. I was 16 years old. About 6 months ago, I started working at a pizza place, and I saved up enough money to purchase a cheap car. I didn't like that I couldn't drive, but I also wanted to deliver things instead of working inside the shop. It was a typical weeknight, and I arrived after school at 5 o'clock and was scheduled until 10:30. Was busy for the first few hours, but at 8 it suddenly slowed down, and 2 medium pizzas were ordered online. No more deliveries were scheduled until 9 o'clock. I picked it up and drove away. There weren't many cars on the road, just a few here and there, but after I had been out of the neighborhood for about 5 minutes, a car pulled onto the road from the side street and followed me. I didn't really think about it. To be honest, I didn't care at the time, because they stayed right behind me for the next 5 minutes. When I turned into the neighborhood, I looked in my mirror, and after a few seconds, their headlights came on, turning down the street. The roads were deserted, and they could have easily passed me if they wanted to. Road, that is quite a coincidence. How likely was it that the only other vehicle on the road was travelling to the same residential area as me? It made me feel a little more conscious of the situation, though I suppose it was quite plausible. I continued to drive down this lane, which was through trees, with separate homes lining either side of the street, some of them directly above it, and some were down longer driveways, and as I moved farther into the neighborhood, my headlights finally illuminated a mailbox with the correct address on it. I turned into the driveway, looked in my mirrors once more, and a few seconds later, the car drove right by and went on down the road. I recall feeling both relieved and foolish for considering such a thing. I pulled up to the driveway's end. I pulled up and got out with the pizzas. It wasn't very long, maybe 200 feet or so, and knocked on the door a few times, but no one answered for a minute. The porch light was on, but it didn't appear that any of the lights inside were on, so I knocked again after 30 seconds. And a light came in through the window, and a woman answered a few seconds later. She was wearing a nightgown and appeared to be in her early 30s. She was extremely exhausted, and something about this felt off right away. I had ordered pizzas to this address, so I read it to her, but she seemed irritated. The woman claimed she didn't order anything and was just trying to fall asleep, and she was undoubtedly a little grumpy. However, it was obvious that there was a mistake. I apologized and left the porch. I was a little lost for a while, staring at the ground and thinking about how strange this was. But halfway there, I looked up and felt a chill go through me. The car that I thought was following me by its headlights was sitting directly behind mine. We're off, but I could see the fog from the exhaust, so the car was still on. I felt really uneasy. Did they also live here with the woman, and they were just pulling in? Or was it related to the woman? Everything seemed so surreal that I knew something wasn't right. I kept walking to my car in hopes that they would notice me and say something or make a movement, since the driveway was narrow, and there wasn't much room to maneuver around them. I got in, threw the pizzas on the passenger seat, and turned on my car, but they stayed there. I rolled closer to the house, thinking that they would see that I was attempting to get out, but they were still blocking my path. I turned to face their car for about 30 seconds as we sat there, and they turned to face me. During that time, I sort of pieced everything together, and they drove behind me, following me into the neighborhood, and the eerie sudden appearance of them blocking the driveway wasn't a coincidence. I felt my body begin to go. When their car doors opened, 4 men got out, their hoodies and hats covering almost their entire faces. One of them had a suspicious-looking hand in his hoodie pocket, as if he was holding something, and they began running up to my car. Panicked, I pressed the gas pedal in an attempt to avoid them. The airbags didn't even deploy, and I don't believe the car was stuck, but I didn't take any chances. I passed their car, but there wasn't enough space, so the wheels ran off the driveway, and I skidded it on the ground, crashing into a tree. It was a fairly slow ride. After I leaped out and began to run, I heard one of them following after me and shouting to the others, but they eventually turned around. When I was secure, my car was never found, even to this day. In essence, the group used a random address to lure me in by ordering a pizza in the hopes of trapping me in what they were going to do with me. I stayed in the woods and called 911. When the officers arrived at the house,